Hello, everyone. Happy Thursday. Good to have you with us. I'm so glad that you are with me on this day. We have a great lineup for you, as always. We're starting off in Tanzania, where if you were watching the show yesterday, you'll know that the U.S. Embassy there put out a warning about an exponential increase in cases. What we know to be sure, to be certain rather, is that they have at least 500 cases in the country. But that's about it. The reason being, the government hasn't put out any official confirmed coronavirus case numbers since the end of April, so nobody really knows what's going on in the country. We're going to be digging deeper to get a sense of why we haven't got numbers and what the true state of play is there in Tanzania. Plus, we have a really fascinating guest for you on today's show. We're going to be focusing on Cameroon, which is a country in Central Africa that has been most affected by COVID-19 so far. And our guest is a traditional ruler, and he's a Harvard graduate. He's also a professor there at the University of Yaoundé. He's going to be joining us to tell us how he is dealing with this crisis in his own local community. And as always, we have the bright side for you, and you won't want to miss that today. He's an international superstar. Rocky Dawuni joins us with a big surprise. Stay with us throughout the hour. Let's get started. All right, then. Well, since March, we've seen countries all over the world essentially do a couple of things: pull back, shut borders, restrict movements, and generally double down on the WHO guidelines to maintain social distance, wash your hands regularly, and just generally double down on trying to keep their population safe at every turn. And yet we're still seeing the surge everywhere. All right, that's what most people are doing. And then there's Tanzania. Tanzania that seems to be doing its own thing. The president there, John Magufuli, asking his citizens to pray the virus away. Besides the closure of schools, there's been no lockdown in the entire country, and the Tanzanian government hasn't released any confirmed COVID-19 numbers since April 29th. So the U.S. Embassy there in Dar es Salaam put out this statement saying, in part, let me read it to you: the risk of contracting COVID-19 in Dar es Salaam is extremely high. Despite limited official reports, all evidence points to exponential growth. You see the exponential growth of the epidemic in Dar and other locations in Tanzania. It goes on to issue this stark warning that we want to share with you. U.S. citizens who remain in Tanzania should be prepared to remain abroad for an indefinite period. So there you have it, the warning there, that all evidence points to exponential growth in the epidemic in Dar and other areas in Tanzania. Let's dig deep into all of this. Joining me now is former CNN journalist, friend of the show, and got to mention her new title, at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. One and only Celine Vergy. Welcome, friend.
Hi, Aisha.
What is the situation there in Dar? The U.S. Embassy, of course, putting out that statement, but not backing it up with any evidence that we could see. So you've been making some phone calls. What are you hearing about the situation on the ground?
Yeah, Aisha, I'm not hearing anything good. I'm not hearing anything to contradict that statement. There were some calls that friends of mine had placed and I had placed to Dar es Salaam, the commercial capital of Tanzania, and everyone's pretty much functioning like business as usual. There's not really any social distancing going on. But one thing that I found worthwhile to note to you is that when we called one of the major hospitals in Dar es Salaam, they essentially said that they could not take one more patient in the hospital. They said that they were full. They suspect, doing guesswork and just general clinical diagnosis, that it is COVID-19, but they don't have the test kits to confirm that is in fact the case. So if you're seeing hospitals starting to not even be able to take in patients, that gives you an indication of the overflow that's coming in. So there's fear, across the country and in Dar es Salaam from some of the people that I spoke to that the numbers are significantly higher. I have one source that had put the numbers after having spoken to a scientist, and obviously this is unconfirmed, but to be around like 16,000 cases.
16,000?
Yeah. Now that is yet to be confirmed, but we are sort of talking to different members in the scientific community, and 10% of those have been fatal, according to the one person that I had spoken to. So the problem here is that now you have rumors because you have no real data reporting, right? Like you indicated yourself that since I believe it's since April 29th, there's been no information. And so you start to get rumors, you start to get a lot of fear, and you start to get conflicting information about what's actually happening. And the other area, sorry.
Before you go on, why are they not releasing data? Are they even testing and they're holding the data, or they're not testing at all? Were you able to get any clarity on that?
So on the testing, there aren't enough kits. So the hospital that we spoke to essentially said that we don't have enough kits in the country here. And Magufuli himself has said, well, these kits are hopeless because we've tested, the COVID kits on goats and pawpaw. Therefore, these are faulty kits. So they came back positive on vegetables and fruits and animals. So the kits are an issue. And the president appears to be, undermining validity of kits and focusing on countries like Madagascar to bring in, herbal remedies. So there's a lot of talk about that particular remedy that's been brought into the country. So that's one thing. And, it's the data is difficult in general because there's so many different kinds of diseases on the continent that we have to grapple with. And so it's unclear if the people are coming in because they have malaria or TB or something else, or is it COVID? So it's just been difficult to determine. Aisha, there's one other thing I wanted to tell you about was the trucking issue, right? So at the border between Tanzania and Kenya and Zambia and Tanzania, there's been a lot of attention because it appears as though truckers coming in from Tanzania into Kenya or Tanzania into Zambia have been testing positive for COVID. So the Kenyan Ministry of Health tested 25 truckers in the last sort of 48 hours or so, and 23 of them were from Tanzania. One was Ugandan, one was Rwandan, and they tested positive. In total, there have been 30 truckers. So that's a really important border crossing for trade and exports and cargo. So that's a problem there. And Zambia has just totally shut down their border with Tanzania, and that's an important copper route. So just keep an eye on that, because as you know, that's a dangerous entry point into countries in the region.
And Zain, I've got to ask you about the opposition there in Tanzania, because they've been making headlines and they've been vocal in their criticisms of the president, John Magufuli, and his handling, or as it is described by many people as not handling the situation. What's the latest we're hearing from them? Because I believe they had boycotted Parliament.
They had boycotted Parliament, and then Magufuli says, well, if you boycott Parliament, then you're no longer in Parliament. So the opposition is being extremely vocal, is extremely frustrated at the way that Magufuli is running this crisis. Many people, both in the opposition party and in the region, is saying, he's Trump of Africa. He's just denying what the facts on the ground are actually saying. But there's just a lot of fear, right? And so people can't discern fact from fiction. You have a politicization of the disease as well. And so that there's probably some of that going on here as well. The opposition has been relatively powerless, with Magufuli sort of operating as an absolute leader in the country, and taken some pretty rough steps against politicians and opposition parties in the country. So I think in the region, there's a desire for cooperation. Actually, there was a conference call for all East African leaders to get on and talk about how do we cooperate with COVID. I don't know if it was a Zoom call or what kind of virtual call it was, but he didn't come on. Mm-hmm. And so, so he's perceived by many leaders in the region as being part of the problem, not the solution, and not willing to participate at the table. And you know, over the years how heavily criticized he's been from both economic policy and now, taking a position on COVID and health, and counting on this unknown, unvetted herbal remedy from Madagascar. which is actually an anti-malarial drug, right?
Yeah,
it's a plant. Exactly. It's a plant extract that use combination therapy, which has apparently helped everyone in Madagascar, but no one else. So jury's out on.
Yeah, somehow it hasn't gone into clinical trials yet, and we still don't have the disclosed data. We're keeping an open mind, but with everything, we need to see the data before we can actually say it works. WHO and Tanzania, have they said anything about what's happening in the country?
WHO is concerned. They're tracking the information. See, what happens is that it's the country's responsibility to give the data to WHO. WHO is like the clearinghouse. So if they're worried about something, the most they can do is ask a member state, please update your data, give us access, give us information. They can't force anyone. They can't force China. They can't force Tanzania. But they can say, we really need an update, so there has been concern. There are behind the scenes communications with Tanzania to just sort of get the reporting straight. What you're seeing also is these burial videos at night that are going on in Tanzania. So the sheer volume of burials, if that is the case of the video of what we're looking at, that's making the WhatsApp rounds, which I have seen, is cause for concern also, both for the region and for WHO. So they would be in contact with the Tanzanian authorities and trying to figure this out and insist on getting the numbers in. So the rest of us know what's happening. But I would be skeptical about numbers coming in from Tanzania at the moment, just because the leader is not invested in the data and in science.
It's deeply, deeply concerning when we talk about coronavirus. This virus is as infectious as it is.
I know.
Zane Verjee, we appreciate you. Thank you for being such a good friend of the show.
Thank you.
See you again next week. Same time, same place. Don't be late.
Always, always, never. When have you ever known me to be late?
Thank you, Zane. Thank you. Appreciate you, Zane. Thank you. Deeply concerning there, the details shared by our own Zane Verjee about details out of Tanzania right now. Unconfirmed, but according to some people she's speaking to, the number of 16,000 cases could be the reality on the ground. Unconfirmed, I want to stress that, but that is the scope that we could be looking at right now. Meanwhile, the president refuses to disclose data or, as we can even tell, do any testing. I want to take a quick check of the numbers now, pull back from Tanzania and give you a full sense of what's happening across the continent in terms of pandemic numbers. Total numbers, they continue to go up day after day, moving in the wrong direction, trending upwards. As of Thursday, as of last check, the numbers that we have, 72,926. If you look at the screen there, for total active numbers, 44,988, and the deaths approaching 2,500. Again, if you're new to the show, just to remind you, we get our numbers from Johns Hopkins University that are collating the data, which is where most people get their numbers for country caseloads. So 72,926, the current number being reported. Tanzania, just to give you some context, confirmed numbers from Tanzania as reported the last time in April 29th was the last time they disclosed numbers, and that was 509. God only knows the truth. 509. They'd recorded 21 deaths. You heard Zane talk about the border closures. Zambia is closing its border with Tanzania for fear of an increase in their own domestic cases. The situation in Zambia, they have 654 cases, 7 deaths recorded there. Kenya also worried, and they've declared a town bordering Tanzania as high risk. The numbers in Kenya, 758 confirmed cases, recorded deaths 42. Staying in that area, Uganda, which also borders Tanzania, 139 confirmed cases, no deaths recorded. Let me move to the west of the continent now and give you some perspective on what's happening there. Ghana's numbers continue to grow. More than 100 new cases logged on this Thursday. And coronavirus has now been recorded in 13 of the 16 regions in Ghana. 13 out of 16 regions in Ghana now have coronavirus. Total confirmed cases, 5,408. Deaths recorded, 24. Nigeria, Lagos, still the epicenter, still concerned about what is happening there. The governor is threatening another lockdown if citizens don't don't fully comply with measures. Total confirmed cases in Nigeria, 4,971. Number of deaths, 164. And Sierra Leone, my home country, so I'm always going to give it a check. Confirmed cases over 400, 408 at last check. Deaths, 26. Leading the way in terms of numbers on the continent, the North, Egypt, they have more than 10,000 cases. At last check, 10,829, over 500 deaths. The south of the continent, South Africa, more than 12,000 cases, 12,074, over 200 deaths. A quick check of the numbers across the continent for you. The numbers are going in the wrong direction. We are grappling with the situation. I want you to bear this in mind. We are at least 3, maybe 4 weeks behind Europe and America in terms of the outbreak in this part of the world. So we are really just getting going, and we are already at over 72,000 cases. Please, let's keep an eye on the numbers. Let's continue to follow them. And I also want to hear from you. I want to hear from you because we do the show so that we can be part of the conversation. We do the show because we want to hear what you're experiencing, what your thoughts are, what the issues you are concerned about are. So write in during the show. I'll get to as many of your messages as I can during the show because I want you to be part of this conversation. The show, it works in this space on digital because we can have a real-time conversation. So please write in, send me your thoughts. It's not just about the academics, the world leaders, and the people, the other guests. You are the heartbeat of the show. Go one step further. I say it every day. Send us a video. Send us a video. Send it to our Facebook page, the Home with Isha Sesay Facebook page, and say to us, we want to see you, we want to hear you. We want to share that with our viewers about what you're experiencing in country. Doesn't have to be long, about 2 minutes. Just tell us your name, which country, and then talk to us. Talk to us about your reality. We want to hear it. We want to share it. Please go to our Facebook page, the Home with Isha Sesay Facebook page, and we will share your thoughts with everyone. All right. Let me bring you some comments now because you have already started writing in, and I want to say thank you to everyone. We've got some regulars who have been watching the show for a number of weeks now, like Bev Archibald is writing in, sending away hello. Belinda Agnes Musa, thank you for the kind words, saying we're doing a fantastic job. Joshua Amos Kagbo, it says, well said, thank you. Momo Tambatule is writing in. Yata Bangora is in the house, thank you. Jonathan Emsa says kind words, asking us to continue the good work. We will continue to cover the story for the continent. We are committed, we're in for the long haul. Bobby Osborne loves the reporting. Thank you, appreciate that. We're getting some other comments. Conte M. Conde says Senegal has test kits costing less than $1, asking a question about those kits that are being produced by the Pasteur Institute. They are in development. They haven't hit the market yet. But yeah, you are right. They are working on these kits, which would have rapid results and should cost about $1. We want to bring you some more perspective on how various countries are fighting the scourge. And I want to turn my attention now to Cameroon and what is happening there. Cameroon, there in Central Africa, the most impacted country actually in the region. And this is a country that has gone through so much in recent years. As you know, they've been fighting a separatist conflict in the English-speaking region that has been going on for years now. There's also the conflict with Boko Haram on the northern border. So there's a lot going on. The government there in Yaoundé has been putting in place measures that you'd expect to see in other places, asking people to wear masks. There's also been a call for restriction in non-essential travel around the country, and also banning large gathering. This is all in place, and yet the numbers continue to go up. At last check, there were 2,800 confirmed cases in Cameroon, and 136 deaths had been recorded. And yet, also, it's worth pointing out that they're also easing the measures now. Even though the numbers continue to move in the wrong direction, Cameroon is now easing those restrictive measures. So we have a really fascinating guest joining us now, who is both a traditional ruler of a village there in Cameroon, and he's a Harvard graduate, professor of public health at the University of Yaoundé. Professor Wilfred Mbacham joins me now. Professor, welcome.
Thank you very much, Aisha, and it's nice to be on the show.
It's so good to have you with us. I'm very grateful for your time. I just laid out, excuse me, I just laid out the situation there in Cameroon, with you being the most impacted country in Central Africa. Let me start with getting your general assessment of the way the government is handling this before we talk about how you are specifically dealing with it in your village. What's your assessment, the rate of testing, the capacity to deal with this?
Well, I think very early on, when the epidemic struck Cameroon, I think the government did well in hurrying to close down the borders. All the borders were shut down, and this helped in exactly stopping all imported cases. However, those who were put in confinement, some escaped confinement, and they went out into the community. And I think what we're seeing now more the community spread. Recently, they relaxed the measures to allow certain night pleasure spots to open up. And they have announced that schools would resume on the 1st of June. That notwithstanding, I think they also went out again yesterday to reemphasize that people should wear masks everywhere they go. And I think that this is the current situation. As of the figures of this evening, we have about 2,954 cases, of which about 139 have died. And just today alone, we had about 154. And so that's a little bit worrisome in the sense that people really haven't have a grasp of what this is, and it might just begin to spread more than we had ever seen. I'm a little bit concerned that maybe when schools would resume, because these usually take very large volumes of students, we could see a new peak, and we can't tell exactly when that peak would flatten out.
Yeah, it's deeply worrisome to see measures relaxed that allow people to get together, as you well put it, for nightly pleasures. Talk to me about the situation in your village. Talk to me about your efforts there to convey the message, to convey the risk of this epidemic, or pandemic rather.
Originally, my village is one of 33 in a clan of about 70,000 people, and we have a Meta Cultural and Development Association called Mukunda. This Mukunda, they had put online that they needed to collect some money, and originally just a few people responded to that. Now, I've been running a foundation called the Fobang Foundation for close to 22 years. And so I stepped forward and I was able to talk and write to the rest of the community, both in the diaspora and here in Cameroon, that this thing is real and we need to get real. And since I knew a little bit about project development, I set out objectives, 6 objectives in total, which we needed to achieve. And out of that, people started contributing, the $10 here, 5,000 francs here, 2,000. And ultimately, we've been able to raise about $26,000, with which we've bought enough equipment. But for us, one of the objectives was also to protect the medical staff, because they're not protected. And so we were able to do this. We were able to give disinfectants so that they could go out and spread. And when 2 cases had been identified, we decided to go to the village where these cases had contacts and start a door-to-door spraying and sensitization. At the same time, doing a contact tracing so that we could identify all those who were had been in contact with those that were infected. And I think that we are at that stage of the campaign, and we're not relenting efforts. This region is a region that is heavily prone with fighters for independence of the southern Cameroons, and we continue to push and make efforts to educate and tell them that when the rain is going to fall, it's not going to fall on any one house top. It's going to fall on every house top, and therefore they themselves are not protected, and we need to do all that we could to have them, as well as all the others, protected from this pandemic.
And so, Professor, let me ask you this. I mean, the thing about dealing with any outbreak of whatever the disease is in Africa, or really anywhere in the world, is you have to take in its social context and what is unique about that place and the way people interact and their own cultural norms. What are some of the things that you're having to adjust for your people? I mean, I'm thinking about the villages that my family is from, where there is where the way you greet is quite close and quite tactile, where there's a kind of intergenerational mix. These are the things you have to overcome. You can't just turn up and say, let's socially distance. You have to take into account what is happening, in these contexts, and amend those specifically, tailor those. How are you tailoring things where you are?
So what we were able to do was first to go out and to create messages in the local language. Did some of my colleague, a traditional ruler, we came up with messages in the traditional language. There is a local radio station that also does a broadcast in the local language. We got some artists and who were inspired and got them to design and compose music in the local language. That not only demonstrated what they had to do, but also said what they could have as home remedies to boost their immune system. So this for us was a response which combined both the Western style of community engagement, but it also allowed for us to look into our cultural norms and see some of those things that were changing. For example, people can't go to funerals again and socialize as they used to do. So we tell them some of those things. You can't go to death celebrations, birth celebrations, or big occasions, and then they start to socialize the way they have been doing. So we show them these, and we do an education that tells that exactly when someone in the house is even infected, you can seclude a section of the room, and they have a responsibility not to infect others. And so these are kind of difficult for us to explain to them, but we try as much as possible to explain it. And I think the reaction to those cases, and whether this is something that you're having to contend with also. Well, when the cases were identified, the first thing is that I think the gentleman who was identified was responsible enough, because once he noticed he had difficulties in breathing, he left and reported himself to the hospital and was quickly moved out of that area to the care center. Now, it so happens that his mother also is positive, and his mother also had been taken out of the area. So very quickly on, they had responded to that kind of a containment measure. What happened subsequently was that people just heard about it. They have never been able to see or relate to somebody who has it. But the more and more we explain in the local language what these symptoms are, I think people are able to identify themselves whether they have it, and we'll describe some of the first aid measures in what to take before they start going to the hospital. And there's a third suspected case that came up in a neighboring village, and the individual was asked to wait and be taken to the hospital. That individual actually trekked herself to the hospital and then was taken to the care center. And we're waiting to see whether truly she has it, or it's just any other normal cough like she used, like any other person would have over the years and the seasons. Yeah, I mean, the point you make there is a very important one, that we're dealing with coronavirus, but it's still occurring in the presence of a host of other diseases that we have to contend with, depending on where you are on the continent. So as you make the point, you have to decipher what it is that people may be suffering from. Professor Wilfred Mbacham, so grateful for your insight and for you sharing the situation with your people in Funam. Very grateful. Thank you. We'll check in with you in the weeks ahead. Stay safe. Thank you very much for inviting me, and I hope that the Greater Meta area would benefit from the efforts that their sons and daughters all over the world brought together to help them stay safe.
Amen to that. Amen to that. Take care. We'll speak to you soon.
Thank you.
That's the situation there in Cameroon, and interesting to hear how they're localizing the response so that it works for the specific context of where people are and what they are dealing with. Apologies if you're having any audio problems are being through. We're working on that in the background. COVID-19 is impacting virtually every industry around the world. I'm actually hearing myself back. If you COVID-19 is impacting virtually every industry around the world, including agriculture. It is impacting everything, and it is small-scale farmers who are responsible for the majority of the food that is in markets in rural areas. And the small-scale farmers are, in fact, women. With COVID now, there are concerns around food supply chains, and that there may be an increase in hunger on the continent. And so with that, we want to take a closer look at the situation and bring in Michelle Kagari. She's the Global Director of Government Policy at One Acre Fund Kenya. And they help to protect the rights and businesses of small holding farmers. Michelle, welcome.
Thank you.
I'm wondering if my audio is weird to you, because it's weird in my ears. Am I clear? Can you hear me?
There's a bit of an echo, but I can follow you.
Okay, so let me just, I know that everybody's watching, so just to let you know, there's an echo and it's reverbing. Michelle, this situation regarding COVID-19 and its impact on small-scale farmers, it's real and it is severe. Talk to me about the situation your clients, the people you're working with, are facing. I know that the issues around inputs, like getting access to seeds and fertilizer and the things they know they need to actually farm. Talk to me about your reality.
Thank you. Yes, so One Acre Fund works very closely with smallholder farmers in 7 countries in sub-Saharan Africa. The COVID-19 response, as governments have pivoted very quickly to protect their citizenry, has had an impact on the food value chains. So in a lot of the countries where we work in, we've got restrictions on movements, we've got curfews. In Uganda and Rwanda, we had full lockdowns. And the impact that had on smallholder farmers, because COVID got to Africa just at the start of the planting season. So being able to access the high quality farm inputs, the seeds and fertilizers that they needed, even with their produce, being able to get their produce to market on time, and for consumers, especially in the urban areas, being able to access fresh produce, that's been quite disrupted. Fortunately, most African governments do recognize that agriculture is absolutely critical at this time. Not only do we need to be eating nutritious foods for our own immunity, but in all these countries, agriculture is the backbone of the economy. So they've been working hard to try and streamline the restrictions so that we minimize disruptions to the food value chain. As One Acre Fund, we were able to provide farm inputs to all the farmers that we serve. We currently serve about 1 million farmers. We were able to get them farm inputs on time so that they could begin planting. And we've been partnering very closely with different ministries of health to provide information to farmers on what coronavirus is, the symptoms, and also how they can keep themselves safe, as well as distributing soap and other appliances, so that they can continue farming.
So what's the greatest challenge you're dealing with right now currently? Where's the focus of your attention?
Right now, the focus is with education. A lot of people are scared. We serve families in the rural areas. So getting a real understanding of what coronavirus is and what they can do to protect themselves and their families, and how they can continue farming in a way that protects themselves and their families. So we've been working in close partnership with ministries of health to really do that education push, and also provide them with soap, and let them know that they can continue farming. Farmers are open for business. And then also working with governments to make sure that agriculture is designated as an essential service, so that all actors in the food value chain can be able to continue to access fresh produce, access inputs, and get fresh produce to the end user.
And Michelle, it's not just about them getting the produce to market. There's got to be a concern about prices going up also.
Yes. Definitely in some markets, like Kenya, we have seen increments in fresh produce in the markets. In some other countries like Rwanda, the prices are a bit more solid. But certainly some of these disruptions are caused because of the breaks in the food value chain, and concerns that we will be having a significant food security problem in a few months' time. So again, that's one of the things that policymakers are trying to juggle. It's very challenging, especially in East Africa, because farmers have been dealt with a double whammy. We've got the worst desert locust infestation in like 70 years. There's a swarm that's predicted to hit East Africa in June, that if we can't control it, could decimate the entire harvest. We are dealing with coronavirus. So yes, we are all, there's a multi-stakeholder group in most countries where we're really trying to see how we can ensure that people are kept safe, people have access to food, people are able to earn some sort of livelihood through this time.
Michelle, is there a window? Is there a window of time that you need to move in? Is there a point of no return?
We are trying to look at this positively, because the choices that we are faced with right now are quite stark. We have to make sure that people have food to eat. Any interventions that we design or that governments design has to be responsive to our realities in sub-Saharan Africa. The bulk of our populations do not have the luxury of being able to lock down in their homes, buy food in bulk, and sit tight for 2 months on. People need to be able to earn their livelihoods in the informal sector, and this includes smallholder farmers. So really making sure that whatever we can do now to support those processes, we do. The good thing is that smallholder farmers are one of the most resilient people. And they are working very hard, and they are doing what they need to do. We just need to make sure that all other stakeholders, our role in this instance facilitates that, and it shouldn't be adding blockages or challenges.
Yeah, it's a mammoth undertaking, because as we made the point that smallholder farmers are responsible for much of the food that is eaten in rural areas, and it's mainly women that are doing this work. So the loss of income affects children and entire families, and the knock-on effects are huge. Michelle Kagara, the One Acre Fund, so grateful for your time today. Thank you for sharing the realities. We're grateful.
Thank you too.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye. All right, so the situation, it's hitting everywhere, as you can see. We're talking about what's happening in capital cities like Yaoundé, what's happening in villages. We take a look at what's happening in villages and how it's impacting farmers. We want to turn our attention to another group of people now. They're the ultra vulnerable. That's how they were described by UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres recently. There are more than 6 million refugees and almost 18 million internally displaced people living in camps across more than a dozen countries in Africa. Let me give you that data point again. More than 6 million refugees, almost 18 million internally displaced people living across about a dozen countries in Africa. That data coming from Refugees International, which is an advocacy group. And these are people who are living in small, overcrowded spaces most of the time, limited access to water. Soap is hard to come by in some places, and they're living in these kinds of conditions and being asked to wash their hands regularly, maintain social distances. I think on the WHO website, there's even a recommendation that if you're sick, call ahead. This stuff doesn't work for people who are living in these kinds of conditions. So we want to find out what is happening to the ultra vulnerable. How are humanitarian groups, how are aid groups responding and rising to the challenge? Joining me now is Mamadou Sow. He's the head of the regional delegation, Southern Africa, for the International Committee of the Red Cross. Mamadou, welcome. I think you need to unmute yourself, friend.
Yeah.
Welcome.
Yeah, I've been Skyping and my colleagues, they laugh at me. I always do that. I go on a litany, and then I realize I was muted. So it's
it was wasted. Everything I said was wasted on you. You didn't hear.
I heard you though.
So, I mean, thank you for joining us. You're joining us from Pretoria there in South Africa. Talk to me about the threat here, the threat that displaced people, that refugees, that people living in camp situations are facing with COVID-19.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you very much. Listen, Aisha, what I usually tell my friends and people I interact with is sometimes, we use all these terms, the refugees, the IDPs, etc. And sometimes we forget actually what led to those situations. And it's always good to also remember that when we are talking about the IDP, and you just give the numbers, we are talking about people whose homes were destroyed. We're talking about people whose homes were bombed. We're talking about people who had to take off in the woods for days sometime with children, and they found themselves in these crowded camps. So the fact of being in the camps itself is not day one for them. It's one part of a long chain of vulnerability that they've been living through. Now imagine, yes, indeed, wash your hands where you have no soap. Keep safe distance where you have the entire family in one bedroom. Stay at home when you have your home being bombed. This is the reality, fortunately, of so many of our people across the country, in so many parts where we're working. And that's why for us, we are in a race against time. We take very much pride in how decisive a lot of African countries have been in putting into place a lot of lockdown and really serious measures. Communities, don't forget, they've been also very decisive and very active in responding to the crisis. But time is an essence, and our volunteers of the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement are across the continent, spreading the right word, sharing the right information, and we're also being quite active in just providing what communities need.
How are you having to modify the way you engage because of COVID-19, given how infectious it is? And, if it was to be introduced into a camp space, it would, the fears it would spread like wildfire. How are you modifying your activities?
Absolutely. This is crucial. There are two things you have to remember, Aisha. One is that the reason why we are in the field working is because of this armed conflict, these wars. They are not stopping, unfortunately, because of COVID. They continue to the contrary. In fact, a few weeks ago, we made a passionate plea to all those who are holding guns in Africa to just try not to impede on the delivery of aid. But unfortunately, we see in northern Mozambique and in many other countries fighting our... Exactly, they're fighting more. So this continues, and all the consequences continues. And now, when we have to respond to this situation, we have to adjust. For example, recently we just carried out an impressive distribution in northern Mozambique, but we had to do it in very small numbers. So that means we have to prepare in advance, take longer time, and bring in small numbers and try to avoid large gathering. Sometimes it's a challenge because we're talking about extreme vulnerability. COVID-19 is a tough one, Aisha. It's a complicated one. You know, you have measures that have to be taken by states to slow the spread. The tougher these measures, the longer these measures, sometimes the better it works. But then when you have these that works, it hit economically people who are vulnerable. And when they're hit economically, especially those who are in most places where we work, they spend more than half of their income on food. So when economic hardship comes, then you have malnutrition on the rise, and people's immune system goes down. And then what happens? They become weaker and more fragile to COVID. And if you have more cases because of that, then the hospitals and healthcare centers are overwhelmed. And if we can go into the topic of health, that's just another situation that the conflict have worsened. You know, Northeast Nigeria, you know very well. We talk about 700 healthcare centers. Half of them are not working anymore. They were attacked and destroyed. We talk about South Sudan, where you have one physician for 65,000 people. So we don't want the healthcare systems to be overrun, you know? So that's why, to avoid this vicious cycle of first and secondary and tertiary impact of COVID, we have to aggressively invest in people. We have to, we do it, and we ask governments to do it at the same time.
And let me ask you, are governments, as they build their COVID response plans on the continent specifically, are governments taking into account these vulnerable populations, these ultra vulnerable populations? Are they being factored in?
We wish there could be more, but it's a tough one again, because you have to aggressively invest in health. But when you invest in health, you want to make sure you don't invest also in social nets. And sometimes it's a difficult balance for states to maintain. This is why we keep saying we're all in this together. It's not just states. It's us. It's humanitarian actors. It's ordinary people, and we've seen this solidarity throughout Africa, and it's quite impressive. We talked earlier about Northeast Nigeria, Aisha. You know, these people who are displaced because of the conflict in Northeast Nigeria, 90% of them are not in camps run by organizations. No. They are living in host communities, communities that were very vulnerable at the beginning, and they are sharing the weak resources that they had with them. So this solidarity is there. I think people are playing their part, we're playing their part, and we are admonishing governments to play even a greater role. And make sure they keep the most vulnerable.
You mentioned time being of the essence. What kind of timetable is ICRC working with? I mean, in some places it's going to be the rainy season soon. That adds its own, logistical nightmare. Talk to me about how you're structuring what happens going forward over, say, the next 6 weeks.
Right now, there's so many different priorities. Now we're entering what we call the lean season in most of sub-Saharan Africa. This is the time when the last harvest is pretty much over. What people have saved is almost over now, and the rain have not started yet. So this is really the tough time for many, and your earlier guests have mentioned it quite beautifully. So we are racing to make sure that we cover in many places in the Sahel, especially where you have vulnerability because of COVID, vulnerability because of climate change, but also because of war. So here we want to make sure that gap is met. But then we have to accelerate with providing with tools and fertilizers and seeds and machinery for people to be able to farm. Because if they don't, because of the restrictions or whatever, then this is going to be a long year. It's going to be a complicated year. So on the economic front, that's a big priority. Other priority involve a lot of prevention. Africa, unfortunately, we have inherited this system of detention, this regime of detention from colonialism that needs to be revised and changed in so many countries. But today you have a 1.1, give and take, million people in lockdown in detention. So just as it is for the camps, so it is for the places of detention. There you don't want to have COVID entering in these places. Some of these places, I've visited them. Some places people just have to stand up like this. Even when you sleep, you can't lay down. You just have to stand. So overcrowded they are. So there we have been massively distributing all kind of tools and how do you call it?
And everything
whatever just can continue to be clean and avoid avoid those difficulties. Families are not being able to come and bring food for their loved ones to the detention facilities. It's another problem, and so yeah, we try to adjust. In places where we try to reestablish family link by providing a lot of phone calls, like in South Sudan that we discussed earlier. There, it's tricky magic because the country doesn't have tremendous air connectivity in terms of telephone. So we have different teams. One team will be in a village with a sat phone, and another team will be in one of these camps that we mentioned earlier with another phone, so that they can connect with their families. But now we cannot send the teams because you as you well know, we've identified 2 cases in one of the camps. So there we just have to send them SMS with credits for those who have phones in those camps, so they can continue to share news with their loved one, because these are precious news as well. But yeah, we've got work to do.
You got a lot of work to do, and we're going to be asking you to come back in a few weeks to update us on how things are going, because we must not forget the ultra vulnerable at this time. They must get as much attention as other groups. So we commit to doing that on this show. So I hope you'll come back and see us again soon.
I will do it with pleasure, Isha. Thank you very much.
Please take care.
Thank you. Ciao.
So many priorities, so much to be done, and we are, in a way, we're racing against the clock. This is a very worrying time. Again, let me get to some comments you've been writing in throughout the show, and a lot of comments. I want to say thank you to everyone. Lots of comments. I always love the comments that come in. Someone's just asking, when are you coming back home? I am home. This is home with Isha Sesay. You're home with me. I will be back home to Sierra Leone, which is what you're asking, very soon when I can. Until then, I'm going to keep broadcasting from here and keep sharing the stories from the continent, so you know what is going on. Titi Bangura says what they're discussing right now is very important. Okay, there's internal spat going on Facebook. We're going to leave that. Ibrahim Sesay says we need to put in place structures and strategies that are sustainable and responsive to vulnerabilities and devastating circumstances. The compounding factors are making it more difficult to fight the pandemic. It's so true. Sofiatu Tunis says Sierra Leonean farmers are still struggling to get their tools and necessities before the rains. It is so important that they're able to do what they can before the rains come, and as this pandemic ticks up, everything needs to be in place before things potentially get worse. Ali Suarez says, thank you for your excellent work. Thanks be to God that you're a Sierra Leonean, a proud Sierra Leonean. So thank you for that note. Teddy Sako says, thank you for answering, Aisha. No place like home. You're absolutely right. I want to say thank you to everyone who's risen in throughout the show. Always grateful. We're always going to try and get to as many of them as we can. Before the show wraps, we are keeping an eye on 5 big stories, and want you to do the same with us in the hours ahead. Let me run through them quickly for you. Burundi has expelled the WHO staff that were in country. They've done it without explanation, shocking the WHO, and now the 4 staff members are being evacuated. They were told to get them out of the country before Friday. They're on their way out. According to the WHO regional head, Matshidiso Moeti, she says the Global Health Organization will still continue to collaborate with Burundi on their COVID response. Turning my attention to Lagos, story number 2. You could call it a case of innovative leadership. The governor of Lagos State is running a poll on Twitter to canvass opinion as to whether or not the lockdown should come back. Lagos is, of course, the epicenter of Nigeria's COVID-19 outbreak. And so he's asking people to vote, to say what they think. Over 70,000 people have responded. The poll closes on Friday. The state government has revealed that the idea is to carry the masses along in governance, but also added the poll will not be the only determinant of the final decision on a statewide lockdown. Story number 3 that we're watching in South Africa, where those Cuban doctors, remember they arrived in South Africa back in April 26th to be precise. They have been in lockdown, in quarantine. That quarantine has now ended, and they are now ready to begin their deployment. They put out a statement on the Cuban embassy website. It read in part, "We have successfully completed in both Cuba and South Africa the strict periods of preventive quarantine, and we are all fully ready to depart for the different provinces of the country and immediately begin the difficult but noble task that has been entrusted to us." Remember, South Africa has over 12,000 cases. Not everybody happy that they're there, but the Cuban doctors, they're ready to start work. Story number 4, Ghana. You may remember I said a little bit ago that Ghana now has coronavirus cases in 13 of their 16 regions. They also have a new hotspot that I want to tell you about. It's the gold-rich town of Obuasi. They've discovered more than 270 cases there. This comes after we were talking about Tema earlier on in the week, that coastal city where one person infected 533 people at an industrial fish processing facility. So Ghana, 270 cases discovered in Obuasi, which is a gold-rich town. Final story that I want to leave you with that we should all be keeping an eye on. Mauritius has declared victory in their battle against COVID-19. They are the ray of hope on this day. No new cases in that country in more than 2 weeks. They say no active cases either. There are 322 recoveries out of the 332 cases they had. 10 people sadly lost their lives to the virus, but this is what the health minister told AFP, which is a news agency. "We have won the battle thanks to the cooperation of the public, who understood that the government needed to take extreme measures, including complete confinement and the closure of supermarkets and our borders." But Mauritius declaring victory against COVID-19. We'll continue to watch that situation. We've shared lots of important information with you over the last hour, and I hope you found it useful. And I want to say thank you once more to everybody who's written in throughout the hour. Thank you for that. We always want to end the show on the bright side, on a ray of hope, and something we can hold on to and feel positive about. We have someone very special who is our bright side guest today. He's an international music star, Rocky Dawuni. He's just a ray of light. He's somebody that I've known for a long time, and we caught up with him a little bit earlier, and this is what he had to say.
Hello, people. This is Rocky Dawuni, live and direct from Ghana. I just wanted to tell you that today I will be joining my great sister Isha Sesay on her Instagram for a chat and a conversation and a discussion and inspiration on the bright side. So no matter where you are, please tune in. And also today also happens to be the day of the premiere of my new video called Champion Arise. It's really an incredible video that, and for a song too, that explores the importance of elevating all of us, the importance of, finding that strength, especially in the times in which we live in, to charge on forward. So join me, make a date, don't miss it. Boo!
Rocky there, don't miss it. We're going to be over on Instagram in a couple of minutes, top of the hour. So join us for that conversation, grab a drink, find a comfortable spot and be part of that conversation. But before I go, I have a huge announcement that I want to share with you, because we have a huge guest joining us on Monday. She's known as Africa's Iron Lady. She led Liberia's fight against Ebola. Former President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf will be on the show on Monday. Get your questions ready. We will put them to her. She is the first former head of state to join us. She's the first of many. There are going to be many people joining us in the weeks ahead, but she is our inaugural head of state joining us. So please get your questions ready. Ellen Johnson Sirleaf will be on the show with me on Monday to talk about Liberia's response to COVID-19, the measures that have been put in place. You may have seen she wrote an op-ed about the situation on the continent, and we'll be asking her about what African leaders need to be doing to better keep their populations, their nations safe, and her view of the international community and their response to this pandemic. So Ellen Johnson Sirleaf on the show on Monday, people. Get your questions ready, be here on time, and be part of that conversation. But for now, whether you're watching us on Facebook, Twitter, or YouTube. That is it for today's show. Stay safe, everyone. If you can, join me on Instagram. But before I go, that was my producer saying, where are you going? We want to debut Rocky Dauni's video, his music video. It is a premiere. Enjoy.
Another spiritual war begin. You say it could not be done until they see it done. You say it could not be you until you know it's you, my friend. My friend. When the humble pop the Bible, they don't ever see it come. They tumble to the magic of the word and the sound forever. I believe now they come around and ask me. Tell them it's the children of Judah, breaker of a chain and the ruler. Everybody spreading, everybody doing it, everybody say yeah. A champion arise, we shall win. A champion arise, we shall win. Whoa, we're stronger and alive, we shall win. Let another spiritual war begin. Don't you believe everything that you've been told? We can be bought for shekels, neither with silver and gold. Across the land, I know that my story will be told. Coming from the young, coming from the old. Tell it to the hills and the mountains to the west. We conquered every fear and passed every test. Converging from the cities, converging from the villages, converging from all across the land. Tell them it's the giant ruler. I and Rasakula. Everybody saying, everybody singing, everybody rising. The champion arise, we shall win. The champion arise, we shall win. Oh, 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 oh. Champion arise, we shall win. Another spiritual war begin. Oh, here we come. Yet another spiritual warfare. Oh, here we come. Fight on, fight on. Oh, here we come. Coming with another spiritual war. Oh, here we come. Fight on, fight on. Joshua send another champion. A champion arise. Show us the way. A champion arise. We shall win. Joshua send Elijah. Let another spiritual war. A champion arise. Joshua send another Moses. A champion arise. Carry us away. Champion arise, we shall win. Joshua bring back Father Elijah. Let another spiritual war begin. Champion arise, we shall win.
It was a good interview. Lots of different people come and hang out with me on the bright side. So yeah, I think better yet, what did you think of the interview? You let me know. Waiting for